leaders and farmers. Good morning and welcome to the 2017 Oxford Farming Conference. My name is Martin Davis and I have the great privilege to chair this year's conference, which takes place 81 years after the first Oxford Farming Conference in 1936. For those of you who were at the pre-conference dinner last night, I promise there'll be no more bad jokes. The outcome of the referendum last year has given the opportunity for a major recalibration of our agricultural policy. As we move from an EU regime which has seen 48 billion spent annually on direct agricultural support, we have the opportunity to develop a cohesive agricultural policy that's fit for purpose. Brexit also gives us the opportunity to negotiate our own trade agreements, but perhaps we should reserve a note of caution. Wilbur Ross, the US President-elect's appointed Commerce Secretary, recently stated that Brexit is a God-given opportunity to steal trade from the UK. It's ironic that 44 years ago, in 1973, the Oxford Farming Conference, held a few days after we joined the European Economic Community, was titled Change and Challenge. These changes now will be taking place in a background where the World Food Programme estimate that 795 million people in the world do not have enough food. Food bank usage in the UK is at record levels. But despite this, globally 1.9 billion adults are estimated to be obese. This is likely to be the greatest change our agricultural industry has seen in recent times. Will we thrive or will we just survive? The Oxford Farming Conference's mission is to inform, challenge and inspire you over the next 2 days, as you hear and learn from speakers who are feeding and watering the city in a world of changing consumer and food and drink trends. Believe that the world is your market and are soil saviours. Most importantly, we'll hear from businesses who are thriving in this changing environment. To thrive, politicians have a critical role to play in setting the framework for farmers and the wider industry. We're delighted to have the Secretary of State here this morning, and I hope that she'll lay out some thoughts on the future vision for agriculture. We're currently a United Kingdom, and following the Secretary of State's address, we'll hear from the political views from around the regions of the UK. Are we united or disunited? Does it really matter? After this morning's break in the North School at the rear, and in rooms 14 and 15 downstairs to the right, we'll wake up and smell the coffee with the founder and CEO of Falcon Coffee, Conrad Britz, who will give the Frank Parkinson lecture. There are a few housekeeping points that I want to cover. If you haven't already done so, please download the Oxford Farming Conference event app. This will be important for you to participate in an interactive session later today, to get your views in advance of tomorrow morning's panel session. We encourage you to tweet through the conference using the hashtag. It's very obvious what it is. To enable you to tweet and use the conference app, there's an open Wi-Fi in the examination schools. The network name is Oxford Farming Conference and the password OFC 17. Digital media is important to extend the reach of the Oxford Farming Conference, and for the first time, the politics session this morning and panel session tomorrow will be streamed live. To complete the housekeeping, please put your phones on silent but continue tweeting. For first aid, the Oxford Farming Conference Secretariat are in room 7, where you should go for any other queries. There will be no fire drills. If you hear the fire alarm, as we did in the Eastgate Hotel this morning at 6 o'clock, it's the real thing. Please calmly make your way to the exits at the rear and to my right-hand side, and somebody will guide you from there. Also, please refrain from flash photography. I ask you throughout the conference to be seated a few minutes before each session starts. If you're late or leave mid-session, you won't be able to get back in, and you'll be directed to the overflow room in room 6. The sessions are streamed live there. We ask you to respectfully stay for the final session when we're joined by our patron, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne. The views expressed by the speakers at the conference are not those of the conference or the Oxford Farming Conference Council. Finally, I'd like to thank the patrons and sponsors of the conference, without whose support it just simply would not be possible to put this conference on. Later this evening at the Oxford Union, aspiring performers can take the floor that has been shared by illustrious company, from Bill Clinton to Edward Heath, who I remind you took us into Europe in 1973, Dizzy Rascal to Jeremy Clarkson. This house believes the biggest threat to the family farm is the family itself. I guess if there's any father and sons here, it might be better to go to the pub. Tomorrow we'll start with a session looking at post-CAP view on agriculture. The conference is not a one-way flow of information. You as delegates have a part to play, and this is your opportunity to challenge the speakers. The agricultural industry in the UK has always risen to the challenge, whether it be digging for victory, entering Europe, or recovering from foot and mouth. Now we have Brexit. We can thrive. We hope that the next 2 days informs you, challenges your thinking, and inspires you. Having made new connections and acquired new knowledge, we hope that you go back to your farms and businesses and thrive. I'll now hand over to fellow director Charlotte Smith, who will run the first two sessions of the conference. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Politics Session, sponsored again by Massey Ferguson. They've done very well this year. We have 5 politicians for the price of 1. We're going to start, obviously, with the Secretary of State, Andrea Leadsom. Now, she has challenged us in that she would like to take as many questions as possible after her speech. That requires a few things. If you would like to ask a question and you are here with us in the hall, then simply stick your hand in the air and wave it in a very obvious fashion. If you are a bit shy or you're watching us in the overspill room downstairs, then you can use the conference app. Simply press the bit that says ask a question. And if you're watching this on the internet on the live stream, then you can still take part if you tweet us or use the hashtag OFC17. However you are asking a question, ladies and gentlemen, may I beg you, less is more in these situations. If you keep it short and to the point, we can hear from more people and cover more ground. Thank you in anticipation. So, for once, I will take my own advice and not hang about. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Good morning. For an industry that's been around as long as mankind itself, farming has always been at the centre of human achievement. And no matter how the world around us changes, we still rely on the same 3 basic needs to sustain us: food, air, and water. Farming is at the heart of all our lives. It builds rural communities. It supports our beautiful natural environment. And vitally, as the global population moves towards 9 billion by 2050, it feeds us. Nothing should be more important to all of us than the continued success of this great industry. So your theme for this year's conference, Thrive or Survive, is very fitting. And I'm confident that 2016 will be remembered as the year that the UK chose to do a whole lot more than just survive. Our ambition, both as a country and as an industry, should be to grow and prosper like never before. The provenance of British food matters to consumers all around the world. When they choose British, they know they can trust the origins of our unique, great-tasting products. And through our schools, we'll be encouraging the next generation to have a closer connection to the land and a better understanding of the food chain. Right now, the whole of our food chain, from farm to fork, adds £110 billion to our economy each year. Food and drink is already the UK's largest manufacturing sector, adding more value to our economy than the car and aerospace industries combined. Our exports are increasing. Non-EU dairy exports are up 91%. Wheat exports are up 80%. And a real triumph, British lamb was voted Product of the Year in France last year. Agriculture and food is one of the fastest growing subject areas at university, with the first graduates from Sheffield Hallam's food engineering course now joining the workforce. And of course, our core strength is our world-leading position in animal welfare, food safety, and food traceability. So as we prepare to leave the EU, the fundamentals of the sector are strong. I believe the British people have handed our food, farming, and fishing industries an extraordinary opportunity to thrive. I was truly delighted to be appointed DEFRA Secretary, and since joining the department, I've made very clear my two long-term ambitions. Firstly, to make a resounding success of our world-leading food and farming industry, producing more, selling more, and exporting more of our great British food. And secondly, to become the first generation to leave the environment in a better state than we found it. These ambitions look far beyond tomorrow. They're about long-lasting change and real reform, an even greater food and farming nation that works for everyone. As a key industry for every part of the UK, from the Scottish Highlands to the Cornish coast, farming, agriculture, and our environment are at the heart of this vision. It's your farms, your produce, your exports that will enable us to thrive. So however you voted in the referendum, you can rest assured that I am fully committed to securing the best possible deal for the UK. I believe that food, farming, and our environment will be central to the success of our negotiations, as well as to our future outside the EU. For too long, a bureaucratic system which tries to meet the needs of 28 different member states has held farmers back. But now we have the chance to design a domestic successor to CAP that works for all of you rather than the entire European Union. As we work towards this, it's really important that we've been able to reassure farmers that they will receive the same level of financial support until 2020, and Pillar 2 payments signed before we leave the EU will be guaranteed for their lifetime. And today I can give further certainty by announcing that the Rural Development Programme is ready to fund its next wave of projects. So in the next few months, up to £120 million will be made available to help support rural growth. The programme has previously supported rural businesses in a range of diverse projects, from installing cutting-edge equipment to restoring floodplains. And the next round of projects will help create more jobs, sell more projects, and access more export markets. I do realise, though, that many of you will be planning much further ahead, and your investment cycles work to much longer timeframes. So it's vital that we start planning now for life beyond 2020. And I want to reassure you that I'm committed to supporting British farming in the short and the long term. And I'm confident that leaving the EU gives us an unprecedented opportunity to design a system that's fit for the 21st century. Now, I can imagine that in this room, there are as many views on the future of farming as there are actual farmers. So that's why, following our 2015 manifesto commitment, I will be publishing 2 green papers, one for food and farming and one for the environment. As the next step in this process, I'll be launching a major consultation on these important issues. This will be your chance to tell us in writing or at the many stakeholder meetings we're planning around the country your views and ambitions for the future. I'm already meeting with farmers, industry groups, scientists, and of course ministers from right across the United Kingdom to consider every aspect of our negotiations to leave the EU. Our EU exit programme in DEFRA has 8 different work streams and is carrying out detailed analysis ranging from market access and labour to trade and agricultural land use policy. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to look at new ideas and also at how other great farming nations operate. So, for example, how do we manage risk and make the industry more resilient to extreme weather and price volatility? How can we prioritise capital investment and boost productivity? And how can we increase food production at the same time as enhancing our natural environment? These are all important questions that will shape the way the industry progresses over the next decades. But no decisions will be taken without you, and this consultation is a key part of the process. There is, of course, another side to our negotiations. We shouldn't lose sight of the other big potential wins for farmers. Too much of your time and money has been wasted on keeping up and complying with EU red tape. Over the past 6 years, we've done everything we can to reduce this burden. But I'm quite sure everyone here can think of at least one piece of EU regulation you won't miss. Now, as we prepare to leave the EU, I will be looking at scrapping the rules that hold us back and focusing instead on what works best for the United Kingdom. No more 6-foot EU billboards littering the landscape. No more existential debates to determine what counts as a bush, a hedge, or a tree. And no more ridiculous, bureaucratic 3-crop rule. By cutting the red tape that comes out of Brussels, we will free our farmers to grow more, sell more, and export more great British food, whilst upholding our high standards for plant and animal health and welfare. My priority will be common sense rules that work for you. But as we prepare to leave the EU, it's also vital that we continue to undertake the day-to-day business that's necessary for a resilient, match-fit industry. I know how important it is for farmers to receive their basic payment on time, so I'm pleased that the RPA has hit its 90% target by the end of December. It's good progress, but I'm very clear we must get all payments out the door. Like you, I won't be satisfied until every outstanding payment has been resolved and 100% of eligible farmers have been paid. We're doing more than ever to improve our resilience to flooding. Over 1 million acres of prime farmland will be better protected by 2021. And that comes on top of the record £2.5 billion we've committed to spending on better flood defences. On bovine TB, our comprehensive eradication strategy is delivering vital results for the beef and dairy industry. And in 2017, England will be applying for TB-free status 2 years ahead of schedule. We remain vigilant against all threats to plant and animal health, including the recent cases of avian influenza. And of course, price volatility remains a big challenge for farmers, but government is doing what it can to help. And thanks to our reforms, farmers are now able to average their profits for income tax over 5 years instead of 2. Greater resilience will enable us to boost our productivity. At every cabinet meeting I attend, improving productivity is at the top of the agenda, and it's a particular focus for farming and rural areas. Currently, 35% of farm businesses generate 90% of the total output, so there's plenty of scope for improvement. And with a focus on resilience and greater productivity, a world of opportunity awaits British farming. But to make the most of this, we have to get 3 very crucial things right. First, to equip the workforce with the right skills. Secondly, to take innovation in farming to the next level. And thirdly, to get out there and export more of our great British food and drink to the world. So the industry needs to attract more of our bright young people into a career in food and farming. And in our 2015 manifesto, we set ourselves a target to treble the number of apprenticeships by 2020. In the summer, I helped to launch 10 new industry-approved apprenticeship programs. These schemes will professionalise careers in baking, butchery and dairy. But backing the rising stars of food and farming will require a joint effort on behalf of government and business. Just before the new year, we heard the fantastic news that McDonald's is moving its non-US operations to the UK, a real vote of confidence in our corporate landscape. It's great news for farming too, as McDonald's have just launched the next round of their Progressive Young Farmers scheme. Other businesses are helping to secure their future supply chain too, with Sainsbury's, McCain's and Moy Park, just a few of the organisations offering apprenticeships in agriculture, farming and food technology. But I also know how important seasonal labour from the EU is to the everyday running of your businesses. I've heard this loud and clear around the country, whether in Herefordshire, Sussex or Northamptonshire. And I want to pay tribute to the many workers from Europe who contribute so much to our farming industry and rural communities. Access to labour is very much an important part of our current discussions, and we're committed to working with you to make sure you have the right people with the right skills. A strong, skilled workforce will allow you to focus on how the latest technology can transform your business. Agri-tech is where the future of food and farming lies. And I've seen for myself how smart innovations can cut costs for farmers and help the environment. In order to get more innovative projects up and running, the government has allocated £160 million to a dedicated agri-tech strategy. This includes funding for agri-tech catalysts and 4 centres for agricultural innovation. From driverless tractors to climate-controlled storage and sustainable initiatives like PepsiCo's 50 in 5, these are the sorts of innovations that will enable us to compete in global markets. And as I've made very clear, one of my key priorities as we leave the EU is to see more great British food grown, sold and consumed around the world. Food exports are up 8% this year, and the Great British brand begins life on your farms. Whether it's best-selling brands like Tyrrell's Crisps, Snowdonia Cheese and Walker's Shortbread, or primary products like barley, beef and dairy, there's a big market out there for the provenance of British food and drink. Our high standards underpin the entire food chain. And it's why the Union flag and marks such as the red tractor and leaf instill such confidence in our products. I saw this for myself in China a few weeks ago, where there's a growing appetite for British food and drink. We now have our biggest export team based there, and the past year has seen a huge rise in UK exports to China, up over 50% on 2015. China is just one of 9 priority markets we identified in our International Action Plan, with markets in the US, Australia, India and the UAE offering big opportunities too. So I'm confident that with the quality and reputation of the food you produce, we can get more businesses exporting and build on the growth we saw in 2016. So to conclude, I have no doubt that our best days as a food and farming nation lie ahead of us. In leaving the EU, we've been handed a once-in-a-generation opportunity to take Britain forward, a real opportunity to thrive. We can design from first principles an agricultural system that works for us. We can go even further to care for our stunning habitats and landscapes. And we can export more of our world-class food and drink. I'm committed to securing the best possible deal for the UK's farmers. And I look forward to working with all of you to secure the future of this great industry. Thank you very much. Yeah, sure.
So, ladies and gentlemen, succinct questions, very welcome. If you're in the hall, if you'd like to just wave your arms around and somebody will bring a microphone to you. While that is happening, I'm just going to pick up on a couple of questions which have come in via the conference app. Sheep farming, especially in the uplands, is reliant on subsidies and exports. Would you agree that both are likely to shrink dramatically after Brexit and our exit from the single market?
I think, as I've said, we will be consulting in the near future on exactly the shape of future farm and agricultural support. And I don't want to second guess by getting into specific details, but as I've made very clear, I will be committed to supporting farming in both the short and the longer term. And I think there are huge opportunities. Well, the question is very specific about the detail of our future policies, and we're not in a position at the moment to be clear about those specific details.
Let's take one more, which is a much wider question. Will there be any Pillar 1 style support post-2020? For those not fluent in the jargon, Pillar 1 is the direct payments to farmers.
Again, that will be all a part of the green paper we're launching, where we'll be looking for views from the broadest range of stakeholders possible on what we want the future for farming support to look like. So again, that's a question about the specifics of policy detail that we don't have at this stage, but certainly during this year, that is the absolute focus.
Okay, let's take some questions from the floor. Let's start with number 5. Just tell
Stephen
us who you
Fell,
are.
Chairman of LEAF. Secretary of State, you talked a lot about exports, as indeed the Prime Minister does, and I wholly endorse that and look forward to that. My question is, how are you going to help that happen? Where is going to be the investment in our embassies overseas? Like you, I've been to Beijing and been very impressed with the Australian embassy, for example, what they're doing. When are we going to have good people on the ground there, and how are you going to help companies get out there and perform?
Well, I would say that ever since this government came in as a coalition in 2010, we've really changed the focus of our embassies, wherever they are in the world, to be much more Great British exports focused. So all of our embassies take a huge amount of their time and effort focusing on market access issues, supporting trade delegations and so on. The Prime Minister, the previous Prime Minister led many of them. The new Prime Minister intends to do the same. I myself will be travelling a lot in 2017 to promote Great British food exports. So I think all of our embassies are absolutely focused on that. And anybody who's interested in exporting, we have the Great British Food Unit in DEFRA, who are there to hold your hands, help you with documentation, with looking at where target markets could be. So I do encourage people who are interested in putting a toe in the water for exporting for the first time to come along and talk to the Great British Food Unit in DEFRA.
Let's take a question from Twitter which is pertinent to that. Will the UK keep single market access if it scraps regulations like the 3-crop rule?
I mean, that, of course, is a part of the discussions in the negotiations. The Prime Minister has made very clear we'll be triggering Article 50 by the end of March, then the negotiations with the EU on the arrangements for when we leave, which will be 2 years later. And those will be exactly the sorts of discussions that we'll be having with the EU as we seek to negotiate our departure.
So from the list that you mentioned in your speech of all the things you'd like to get rid of, actually, you might not be able to in the long run.
Well, you know, those will be part of a negotiation. And of course, as we leave the EU, all of the decisions around what we do may have consequences, but they will be decisions for the UK Parliament to make in consultation with stakeholders.
Let's take another question from the floor. Number 1 over there, behind the lectern.
Fiona Fell from Northumberland and the board of AHDB. And Andrea, I was just wondering how you're balancing the calls for habitat and wildlife conservation with your vision for increased productivity in food production.
I mean, I think that's a really key question. And as I tried to make clear in my remarks, I have twin ambitions. One, to support Great British food production, exports, greater productivity, greater success for our UK farming sector. but at the same time, a very clearly stated ambition to be the first generation that leaves the environment in a better state than we found it. And I don't see those two things as mutually exclusive. I think you can very much, I mean, we were discussing over dinner last night the value of more focused use of pesticides that reduces the absolute amount that's being used, but at the same time helps the environment and saves costs for farmers. So I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, and we'll be looking to take advantage of the opportunities to encourage more sustainable, more environmentally friendly agriculture in the future.
Okay, let's go with number 2. Thank you. Do tell us who you are.
Thank you. Looking at you from across the Irish Sea, Britain, of course, is one of the great food importing nations of the world. Do you expect when you leave that you will in fact reduce your animal welfare and traceability standards to facilitate imports from other parts of the world outside of the present EU? Thank you.
No, not at all. I see our high standards of animal welfare, food safety, food traceability, as if you like a USP, a unique selling point for the UK brand. And I think that's something that what we're seeing around the world is increasing demand for high quality food. And that I think is going to be something that will enable us to be exporting more and to be much more successful around the world. I detect a kind of a sort of, so what about imports in your question? So to address that, it's absolutely clear that within any free trade agreements that the UK may negotiate in the future, that those issues will be absolutely at the forefront, because what we don't want to do is to either reduce our own animal welfare, food safety, food traceability standards at home, nor to import cheap, poor quality competition that then undermines our own farming sector.
Number 5.
Patrick Cook from PD Hook Hatcheries Limited. My business and thousands of other farming businesses here in the UK rely on a workforce of migrant skilled labour, both permanent and seasonal. How will the UK government maintain access to that workforce for UK agriculture if it intends to restrict that access?
I mean, this, as I mentioned, is something, a question that I've heard right across my visits all around the United Kingdom. I'm extremely aware of it, and I've spoken very directly with the Home Office about this matter. They are looking at it very closely, and it is fully our intention to ensure that the labour needs of the food and farming sector are met.
How?
But all of those, well, you know, this is again, you're asking me to go into the specific policy details, which we don't have as yet. But all of this analysis, rest assured that this is being looked at very closely, and has been ever since the results of the referendum debate were known. And so there will be announcements in due course, but I'm absolutely committed to making sure that we have the right skill set and the right level of workforce for the UK food and farming sector.
Let's take another question from Twitter. DEFRA has recently suffered big cuts. Is it now too emaciated to take on the Brexit challenge?
So DEFRA has actually undergone an amazing transformation where they've actually done some quite groundbreaking work on sort of combining back offices and really saving money, but at the same time giving a better service, a more focused service to customers, which is actually very positive. In terms of our preparations for Brexit, we absolutely have the right resources, and we are very carefully monitoring exactly what the need is. We've assessed it very carefully and shared that across Whitehall and got a great deal of support. So I'm confident that we have the right people and the right skill sets.
Just a quick show of hands. Who shares that confidence? Who? George does. The farming minister just saving his job there, ladies and gentlemen. Who is not quite as optimistic as the DEFRA ministry team? Okay, so perhaps some work to do there.
Well, you know, I'd offer a job swap for a day. You know, come in and take a look. Okay. I mean, I have to say, you know, that there is a huge commitment and a huge amount of work going on, and it's very well resourced with some really good expertise. So do please be a bit reassured, possibly.
Let's take question number 3 at the back there.
Minister, Peter Clark from the West Country. You praised us up, the farming community, no doubt in your presentation. What we need to do or have given to us is everything in the ammunition box, everything in the toolbox. We need those tools. But more than anything, we want honesty from your inspectors, which unfortunately, and dealing with the job I'm dealing with, I come up against misrepresentation, shall I say, on almost a daily basis. That has got to stop. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that. I mean, if you have evidence of problems with inspectors, then please do write to DEFRA on the point. I mean, anything like that we would definitely want to know about. But what I can tell you is, as we leave the EU, we do have the opportunity to look at rules that work for the UK. And one of the key opportunities that we think will exist for farmers who, let's face it, the majority of farmers do the right thing, care about the environment, and the opportunity is there to minimise and reduce the amount of burdensome inspections and visits that they have to receive. But if you've got specific concerns, then please do email me.
Sorry, I was just going to take a question from the conference app and it has very inconveniently disappeared. Hang on a minute, it's coming back. There is a strong case for subsidies for environment and landscape management, but not food production. Do you agree?
This is a part of the consultation that we want to have. I want to hear other people's views. I mean, I certainly think that food production and environmental protection should be a win-win. We should be able to do both in a very successful way, and as we leave the EU, having the policies that suit the United Kingdom and not 28 EU member states gives us a huge opportunity. But to try and answer a very specific question like that is going too far into the detail, and we're not at that point.
Okay, let's take number 5.
Charlotte Middlebrook, National Federation of Young Farmers. You mentioned that it's really important to encourage the next generation to have a better understanding of where their food comes from through school. I'm actually a primary school teacher, but I come from a farm, and so obviously I come from quite a unique perspective in that I am trying to encourage my pupils and educate them in the countryside and food production all the time. But how do you intend to ensure that the next generation are better educated in this and that it's consistent across the country? Because obviously the majority of teachers do not come from the background that I come from myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and of course what we all know is that actually more engagement with the great outdoors and being closer to nature is very good for people's well-being, for their mental health, for their physical health, and so on. So it's really tied in with the sort of the better future for young people generally. And certainly as part of our green paper on the environment, that's one of the 5 aspects of the framework that we're putting forward, is connecting people more with nature, and how can we do that, consulting on that, but also with our own ideas about what more we can do, particularly in schools. And there is one programme that I would raise, which is a lovely plan that the Woodland Trust is putting in place, which is planting trees in schools. And there is a scheme that we have with the Woodland Trust to be able to do that, which in a small way, granted, but actually is helping young people to get involved with what's involved in growing a tree and so on. So I completely agree with you. It's a really important area, and it's something we want to do a lot more on.
Okay, let's go again from the app. You mentioned risk management for farmers. How would you envisage that working in general terms?
Well, in general terms, there are lots of examples around the world of other countries managing things differently, with things like crop insurance, dairy futures, other ideas other than just straightforward subsidies. And all of those ideas are what we're hoping to get into the pot in our consultation in the Food and Farming Plan.
And when will we have the consultation?
Soon, in the near future, as soon as possible.
I think that's as specific as you're going to get, yes?
It is,
I was hoping for next Tuesday at 3, but there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for, because we are keen to also hear from all corners of the United Kingdom. Could you join me in thanking the Secretary of State? Thank you. So could I ask our next panel to take the stage? If you'd like to come up, ladies and gentlemen. This panel I could introduce really as like the beginning of a very bad joke. We had an Englishman, a Northern Irish woman, a Welsh woman, and a Scotsman, and they all went to a conference. I shall resist the temptation. Let me introduce them as they sit down. We have with us, representing in the English corner, I suppose, if you like, George Eustace, the Farming Minister. Then we have from Northern Ireland, Michelle McIlveen, Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. Then we have Leslie Griffiths, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Environment and Rural Affairs in Wales. And on the end, Callum Kerr, representing Scotland. He's an SNP MP who speaks on environment and rural affairs. You'll recognise the theme here, ladies and gentlemen. We have, when we've been organising this, really called this panel the Disunited Kingdom. As we invent son or daughter of CAP, what will we have? Is it a British agricultural policy? Is it a series of domestic agricultural policies? So to start, I'd like everybody on the panel really to outline their hopes and fears. What do you hope you will get, and what do you fear you will end up with? George.
Well, look, I'm somebody who campaigned to leave the EU, and one of the reasons for that is I'd had 3 years working with EU law up close as the Minister for Agriculture, and it's not a pretty sight. I think what we have now is a sort of bureaucratic morass of rules that attempts to codify every landscape feature, everything a farmer might try to do with their land. We've got rules on the minimum width of a hedge, the maximum width of a hedge, what you're allowed to grow over the hedge. This system is backed up by a completely dysfunctional system of fines and penalties set out in EU law, and it really doesn't work. So my conclusion was that pan-European policy for agriculture has been a failure. And what we have now, in my view, is a fantastic opportunity to develop coherent national policy. What we gain by leaving the EU is the ability to decide, to get things done, to make things happen, to deliver change where change is required, and it's really quite exciting. So what I think we need to do is to unbundle, if you like, the competing and sometimes conflicting objectives of the CAP. We've got a chance to look at how we really drive increased profitability of the farming sector, how we support knowledge transfer. So we're looking at issues such as grant and loan capital to help investment on farms. As the Secretary of State said, we're also looking at risk management tools from insurance schemes, mutual schemes, other approaches taken in countries like Australia and Canada to help farmers manage and mitigate risk. When it comes to the environment, we've got an opportunity to take a much more holistic approach to improving our farmed environment. And rather than seeing environmental objectives and agriculture as being in antagonism to one another, a real chance to develop something fresh and new, a fusion of what you might call old-style, old-fashioned husbandry when it comes to soil husbandry, crop husbandry, and animal husbandry with the best modern genetic science we've got. And finally, we've got an opportunity to drive up animal welfare standards and really look at how we can incentivize different approaches to animal husbandry that reduce our reliance on antibiotics, that develop an international brand as the best animal health, animal welfare country in the world, and which crucially improves animal welfare as well. So it's a very exciting opportunity, a chance to think things through from first principles.
And do you see that as a British, a pan-British policy, or lots of different bits?
Well, clearly, at the moment, the devolution settlement was done in an era when basically everything was decided in Brussels anyway. It was a very sort of Tony Blair offer that you can have this devolution, but by the way, all the rules are set in Brussels. What we now need to do, and we'll do this in cooperation and discussion, obviously with all the devolved administrations, is to work out what kind of UK framework that you need. But also within that, making sure there's as much discretion as possible for individual devolved administrations to pursue policies that work for them. And we've got a diversity of farming in the UK, so we do want to ensure that people can pursue the types of policies that will work for them. But I think everybody accepts as well there'll need to be some kind of UK framework to replace what's broadly decided at the EU level now.
Michelle, what would you like from this process, and what do you suspect or maybe fear you'll end up with?
I suppose from a Northern Ireland perspective, agriculture and food processing is incredibly important to us. Northern Ireland is a net exporter with 75% of our produce, our sales going outside of Northern Ireland. Those sales are worth £4.5 billion to the Northern Ireland economy. So this sector probably is much more important to Northern Ireland as it would be to the United Kingdom as a whole. As someone who supported leaving the EU, obviously I see Brexit as an opportunity for really exciting things to happen and for real change to happen for the benefit not only of Northern Ireland but also for UK farmers and producers. But those opportunities obviously include developing a future agri policy which will better suit our local needs, as George has outlined, and providing much more long-term sustainability, and also to remove, as we've heard earlier, the bureaucracy which currently exists within EU regulations. What we do need, most importantly, will be a transitional system, which we can look at to see us through to over the next number of years. I think as a region, we will be looking for some flexibility within a UK system, but we do have a unique issue within Northern Ireland in that we will be the only region that will have a land border with another EU member state. It's vitally important that we do retain that flexibility in order to be able to allow for trade. You'll be aware of the movement of our milk moving from north to south, lambs, pork as well. So I mean that's happening on a daily basis, and we always have to be cognizant of that and the need for to retain that as we move forward. So there are concerns, particularly in relation to trade, and we will also be mindful of any trade deals that we would then have would impact the quality of the food that we do produce. I think we do have to be mindful, obviously, that Northern Ireland is very much part of the United Kingdom, and as a net exporter, I mean there are great opportunities for us to provide additional market to, and obviously see the UK or the mainland as a market for our produce. So there are opportunities within that, but I think we just need to be very mindful of the current position that we have.
Leslie, how about from the Welsh perspective?
Obviously, agriculture and environment policy has been wholly devolved to the Welsh Government since 1999, and we have seen that divergence of agricultural policy across the UK. Your question was to George was, do you see a British agricultural policy? Well, no, I don't. I very much see that we will have a Welsh agricultural policy. However, I absolutely recognise that there will need to be frameworks in place, UK frameworks in place to work following leaving the EU. Those frameworks have to be based on agreement between the UK government and all the devolved administrations. There must be no imposition. I don't see this as a rowing back from devolution, and certainly my discussions with the agricultural and environment sectors over the summer, we've done some very extensive work with our stakeholders, has given me no idea that they view that the same way. I'm very pleased that we've got such good ministerial engagement now, because I think, you asked the question, is it a United Kingdom or a disunited kingdom? And I think going forward, we have to work together to make sure we get the very best. I was a passionate Remainer, so of course I see the risks and challenges, but I also see the opportunities too that both George and Michelle have referred to.
How different might a Welsh agriculture policy be to an English one? How much change or how much difference would you expect?
Well, going forward, it might not be that different, but obviously each part of the UK has very specific requirements, and I think we need to make sure that we have that flexibility to ensure those specific requirements are met. Like other countries, we will be having consultation. The First Minister is going to publish a position paper in relation to the EU from a Welsh Government perspective later this month. My officials are working up, obviously, lots of different areas of policy, and we too will go out to consultation. I think stakeholder engagement is so crucial, and that's why, I think it was July the 3rd, we had our first stakeholder roundtable meeting. We've had those consistently and workshops over the past 6 months. I don't want people working in silos. I think it's really important that you don't have agriculture working over there and environment working over there. So that's what we've done going forward.
Callum, what do you want out of this process? What do you fear you'll end up with?
Well, you said at the start, hopes and fears. In my old job, we used to say hope is not a strategy. But it's, many people in this audience, it will be the one word that they feel they have, because sometimes it's all you got. I mean, I think, of course, we're in a post-Brexit vote, so there's a desire to look for the opportunities. And there are undoubtedly opportunities there in terms of with the repatriation of powers, the ability for Wales, as was outlined, and for Scotland too, for the opportunity to design a fit-for-purpose replacement for Pillar 1. By the way, I thought it was astonishing. I know you can hide behind a consultation up to a point, but I thought it's astonishing. Of course there should be a Pillar 1 equivalent after 2020. There should be, as we talk about what happens next. Yes, of course, we have to consult. Yes, we have to negotiate. But there should be core principles that are behind what we want, both from Brexit and post-2020. And this is where my fears are. There are huge questions to be addressed here. We heard some of them. Free movement of people, which is critical to the rural economy and, of course, agriculture. To support payments, I do not like the word subsidy, support payments that underpin our food security in this country. And, of course, trade. And there's a lot of great talk about trade, but let's not forget that today the majority of our agricultural trade is with the EU, the very market that is currently under threat. So there are big fundamental questions to be addressed. They are complex and they are difficult, which is why a simple statement like Brexit means Brexit is a bad starting point. We have to acknowledge the complexity, we have to embrace it, and political leadership is about coming forward with solutions into that environment. And of course I'm partisan, right? I'm an MP, but we have an SNP administration at Holyrood. And I think what Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government and what Fergus Ewing are doing is the right approach. We are out consulting straight away with our European friends and neighbours. We got together an expert panel that looked at the difficulties, that looked at the challenges. And I don't know how many of you have read it, but guess what? If Brexit means Brexit, well, here's way more than that. Here's concrete proposals that actually outline what we can do, and they're very reasonable. And within this context, what I hope is that the UK government and Theresa May is true to her word, their word, and they will listen and consult, and we will be equal partners in the Brexit process.
I want to open this up to questions in just a moment. So if you have questions, do start putting them up via the app, or tweet them, or indeed plan them, and get your hand up in just a moment. Let's take that question that was put, I think, via the app to Andrea Leadsom. Will there be support payment subsidy, choose your own word, after 2020? So, George, as a principle, will you be paying farmers that direct sort of payment?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to escape this kind of mantra of Pillar 1, Pillar 2, which is EU definitions which actually don't mean anything in the new will. So there won't be a Pillar 1 and a Pillar 2 in the sense that we have it now. But we will have a funded agriculture policy. And the point that I've made is, and this is where I agree with Callum, perhaps we can start with a united kingdom on this point. I don't like the word subsidy either, because the truth is that if you just throw subsidies into a system as we do now, it comes out all over the place. It can lead to increased rents, because landowners charge more than they otherwise could. It can lead to increased costs of farm inputs. In some cases, it can actually enable producers to continue to produce food at an undervalue, so the consumer benefits from the subsidies that go to farmers. And yet, all the while, farmers are told, you should be grateful for these benefits you're getting, so do all these list of demands that we have of you. I want to get to a different system where, yes, we support agriculture, but where we support it to become more profitable, more vibrant, so that we see an expanding food production in this country, where we are supporting farmers to deliver ecosystem services, so that rather than telling them, here's a subsidy and now here's a list of environmental demands we have of you, instead we should be saying to farmers, you have a role to play to enhance our agricultural environment. We're going to reward you for those services that you offer. So I think it's about how we basically reward and support farmers. That I want to have a funded agriculture policy, and we will have a funded agriculture policy. But I don't think this notion of subsidies is helpful. And if subsidies equals direct payments, then yes, obviously we'd like to move away from that. But it doesn't mean moving away from supporting agriculture. It just means supporting agriculture in a better way.
So English farmers can expect support for agriculture to be profitable and vibrant, ecosystem services payments for environmental services. Will Welsh farmers expect the same, get the same? Is that your direction of travel?
Yes, I think they would expect the same, and they will get the same. We've been told that the payments are there till 2020. After 2020, there's a black hole at the moment. We don't know what funding we will have. However, I cannot imagine a time when we will not have payments for farmers. But I do think there is a big issue around the public with farmers, and certainly, the agricultural shows I attended over the summer and the farm visits I undertook. I think there is a big piece of work to be done between the agricultural sector and the public. I've been health minister, for instance. I've sat around the cabinet table and had to fight for money. My predecessors haven't had to do that. Either I myself or my successors will have to do that. And I think, the public don't understand what agriculture does. They don't understand where their food comes from. They don't understand, the wonderful guardianship the agriculture sector has of the land. And I think there is a huge piece of work there to be done.
Michelle, in Northern Ireland, broadly the same?
Yeah, I think so, but I think we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we don't know what post-2020 is going to bring, regardless of whether we were remaining within the EU or coming out of it either. So we're in that sort of limbo with regards to what that support's going to look like for the rest of Europe. But certainly we would be looking for support. But as George has said, that support will come in many different ways, and I think there is a pressure on farmers to meet various standards, be it through animal welfare and the quality of their produce. But that support can also come from the knowledge base that we give to farmers, and also through technological developments and through our own research and knowledge base as well. So there's a number of ways in which we can support farmers as well as working alongside not only the producers but also the processors as well, in order to ensure that farmers get a better price for their produce.
Callum.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that support payments are particularly critical in Scotland. The support payments Scottish farmers receive make up 2/3 of the total net farm income. That is a significant contribution. So whilst we may I've not yet to meet a farmer, by the way, who wouldn't like to have the ability to get a fair price for his product and not need direct income support. But the reality is we're not there. We need direct income support. Yes, we need to do more around innovation, and we need to do more around environmental management. But I think it should be a core principle that we maintain farm profitability through these direct payments. And yes, we will evolve what that looks like within the regions of the UK, but it should be something that we're committing to. And I think George kind of is. But the fear we have is that actually the voice of DEFRA, when it comes back to the UK, is not strong enough. That when it comes to prioritising money, will DEFRA have a strong enough voice in the Treasury to take on the City of London in finance, to take on the tech sector? That's where the fear lies, because I hae my doubts.
George.
Well, let me deal with that point first of all. Absolutely, we have that voice.
Oh, really?
Yes, you have to bear in mind that 40% of all EU regulation comes under the remit of DEFRA. 80% of all of the laws DEFRA deal with are European laws. That gives us an incredibly powerful voice in government, because government knows that they need DEFRA to navigate their way through this and to actually establish new policies. The other thing, when it comes to funding, you have to understand that in big decisions like this, really big decisions about re-establishing domestic policy in an area that's been abdicated for half a century, this will be a cabinet decision, and cabinet will take this decision very carefully, having weighed up exactly what different constituencies right across the country in Parliament believe. So this will be a decision that is finely balanced and very much thought about in great detail. And something else I want to say on support payments. If you look at Scotland, the truth is that area-based payments don't really work very well. NFU Scotland have made this point. It's why they argued for coupled payments. If you went to the type of support I'm interested in exploring, risk management tools to help farmers when things really badly go wrong, support to help farmers improve their productivity and profitability, you actually target the support at active working farmers without having to have any kind of active farmer test written in EU law. You can design a system that delivers support to proper farmers, rather than the issue they have in Scotland, which is a big problem of the so-called slipper farmers, people who aren't farmers at all but are just running grass shoots and the like and claiming large amounts of subsidy. So there's an opportunity here to make sure that we target our support to genuine farm enterprises.
Okay, let's take some questions. Stick your hands in the air and microphones will come rushing towards you. While they do that, let's take a question that's come in on Twitter. Could we see England have both risk management and crop insurance, as Andrea Litson mentioned, and others going a different path?
Well, this very much depends on an issue that frankly we haven't resolved yet, which is where we draw the contours of a UK framework and where we enable discretion for each part of the UK to pursue policies that work for them. We're not at that stage, but we're exploring all of these options. We've done a vast amount of detailed analysis on this, and we will be sharing that with the devolved administrations. And it'll be for each to sort of express a view on that, and we will develop a coherent UK-wide framework, but with discretion for individual parts to obviously do their own thing.
So you could have an insurance scheme in England and something completely different with everybody else?
Well, you could or you could not. You may have some of these things may be UK-wide measures, because obviously crucial reasons for having, by the way, a UK framework is we don't want to have big distortions in the UK market. So you want countries to be able to pursue policies that work for their own agricultural environment, but to preserve the integrity of the UK market, you will want to have some sort of measures that prevent, so for instance, large anti-competitive subsidies in one part of the UK that would be against the interests of others.
Certainly that was the point I was going to make, actually, that I would have a concern that we would end up having distortions and we would end up becoming competitors as opposed to actually working together, which is what we need to do if we're going to go out into the broader market. But certainly internally we need to make sure that, that we don't then create a distortion that penalises. But I think also there probably would have to be perhaps triggers, particularly for the likes of Northern Ireland, given our near neighbour, and particularly around issues such as dairy and milk prices. That in itself can be something which is very pertinent to us locally. But I suppose it is still quite early, but at the same time I think we need to be cognizant of the challenges that could present.
Leslie?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think the most important thing is to make sure there aren't unintended consequences, so it's absolutely right to get those frameworks correct, but it is a bit early really to know the specifics of those detailed policies.
I think as Leslie said earlier, we have a repatriation of powers from the EU. That's not to then facilitate a centralisation in Westminster instead of Brussels. So is there the possibility of different policies in the different parts of the UK? Of course there is. In fact, there should be differences, but those differences should be done sensitively and they should be negotiated, and we should consult as good neighbours should.
Okay, let's take some questions. Again, ladies and gentlemen, do tell us who you are and please be as succinct as you possibly can be. Let's start with number 5 and then we'll go to number 6.
Angela Kirkwood, a farmer from East Yorkshire, and I'm representing the emerging leaders. George, how will the government support British agriculture in order to maintain and expand our markets and help the industry thrive with the threat of cheaper, inferior imports?
Just before you answer that, we'll be hearing a lot more about Emerging Leaders, which is a new initiative under Martin here at Oxford. You'll be hearing a lot more from them and about them. Sorry, do go on.
Well, look, we've got a manifesto commitment to promote high standards of animal welfare in any future trade agreements, and we'll stand by that. Just because we've left the EU doesn't mean that drops out. So we will, as part of our international trade negotiations, obviously be reflecting the fact that we've got higher standards of animal welfare. It would be unfair to expose producers to competition from countries that basically engage in practices that would be unlawful in this country. So that'll be a factor that'll be looked at. And this is common in trade negotiations. We're not used to it because we've abdicated responsibility for trade to the EU for the last 45 years. But most other countries deal with these types of issues all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have identical regulations. You can seek to recognize equivalence where your regulations are similar. And Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the US have a system called the Quad, where they basically agree broadly similar approaches in these areas to facilitate the recognition of equivalence and free trade agreements. So there's lots and lots of ways to do this, but we stand by our manifesto commitment.
Okay, anybody else wants to come in on that?
Yes, I agree with that, and certainly the stakeholder engagement we've had over the summer, every single sector has said there must not be a race to the bottom on standards. We have these very high standards. Certainly in Wales, we're very proud of our animal health and welfare, and we don't want to lose any of that going forward.
Sorry, number 6.
Gareth Morgan from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. I wondered if any of the panel had a chance to look at the headlines from the Environmental Audit Committee report that came out this morning from the House of Commons, which was both very interesting and quite alarming in parts. In particular, their thoughts on whether there's time to give proper parliamentary scrutiny to the third of legislation, farming and environmental legislation, that needs to be moved across, that cannot simply be transposed, that needs to be put before appropriate parliaments around the UK now.
Callum.
The quick answer to your question is no. I haven't had a chance to look at that report. Hopefully you'll excuse that, given it came out this morning. I think there are obviously massive concerns around these areas. That's why actually at least the move with the Great Repeal Act to take every piece of legislation and embed it into UK legislation is important. But, and actually what I haven't heard really is any moves to diminish necessarily the environmental standards. And I think the government and the minister dance a fine line here between talking about maintaining standards and yet at the same time cutting up red tape. And they can be two sides of the same coin. So we need to be very, very careful how we do it. In terms of the timing and the importance of Parliament, I find that slightly ironic, considering the government just forced us through a big court case because it didn't want Parliament to be involved in a process. It really wants the executive to decide. But Parliament must play a role. All stakeholders must play a role. You as the RSPB must play a role. If we need more time, then we need to take steps that give us more time, because we should be very careful, not least when it comes to the environment.
George.
I've seen the headlines of the report, and I don't share their concern. You know, we're looking at this in great detail. We've been clear that when it comes to environmental legislation, which is principally regulations that have been put in place in this country under either the Habitats Directive or the Birds Directive, through the Great Repeal Bill, we're going to simply put them on a legitimate UK legal basis, and then refine and improve and modernize them over time. That's the approach that we're taking. And I think that there are some regulations that are what the lawyers would call inoperable. That is that you can't simply convert the SI, the statutory instrument, this is technical, but the statutory instrument we put in place in response to a directive, you can't necessarily just simply convert them. But there are other ways of dealing with that, and I can assure you that our lawyers are looking at this closely. And those elements of EU legislation that are deemed inoperable at the moment, that issue will be dealt with by lawyers in the usual way through the drafting of the Great Repeal Bill.
Anyone else? No? Let's go to number 5. Please, thank you.
Morning, Fiona Hanna, also from the Emerging Leaders Programme. What would you say to encourage and to reassure those of us who are early on in our farming careers when all the questions at the moment seem not to have available answers?
Yeah, a very good question. Yes, so I suspect you're from Northern Ireland. Let's start with Michelle.
I think we can applaud that question. It is very early, and we do see that there are challenges within that, but I think there's still an opportunity now for us to be able to shape the policy going forward. So I think the fact that we do have a little bit of time before something is actually presented to as a fait accompli, I think it is useful. Certainly over the last number of months, similar to Leslie, we've had quite a number of stakeholder engagements. We've had, obviously George has visited Northern Ireland, and I'm going to talk from Northern Ireland perspective, and Andrea Leadsom has also done the same. And that has created an opportunity for industry locally to give very much their own perspective on how they feel that things should be shaped and move forward. So while I don't think we don't have the answers at the moment, I think that in some ways should be, it's to benefit to you in order to be able to shape where we're going forward.
Callum.
I was going to say take up prayer, but that's a little bit too flippant. But how can we reassure you? I mean, there was a study that came out yesterday in Scotland that said that 20% of Scottish farmers were thinking of getting out in 2017 because of Brexit. And at dinner last night, I mentioned this, and the response was, well, there's an opportunity for new entrants. So how do we reassure you? With difficulty is the answer. I think what you need is you need politicians and you need government to at least show that they understand the issues and the challenges that you are facing, that they are with you. And that's why saying things like support payments should absolutely continue until, if we reach a scenario where we honestly believe they're not required, where you do need answers, core principles that are part of the Brexit negotiation on trade, which is why we are arguing that we should remain part of the single market. So you deserve answers. Brexit means Brexit is not enough. If there are 8 work streams in Brexit, in the DEFRA department, well, what are they? Let's understand them. How do we influence them? Let's not wait for a consultation, because most consultations, since I've become an MP, which was only in May 2015, feel a bit like, we'll ask you what you think, but we've already made up our mind what we're going to do. So let's make this a proper consultation where we are part of the process, where your voice is heard, so that you have confidence because you think people actually get it in politics.
Leslie.
Yeah, absolutely. We have something in Wales, Farming Academy, which is full of young farming, not just new entrants, but also have inherited a farm and come forward in that way. And they are asking questions, and they do feel that perhaps everything is sort of weighted to the other end of the agricultural sector. But what I think we can learn from you and helping us making those decisions is R&D, for instance, innovation. We need to be doing more of that in Wales. I'd be the first to say that. And one of the messages they give me is something that I've always said: you can't just keep doing the same things differently, you've got to be doing different things. And I think it's the new entrants and the younger farming sector that have those ideas. But at the moment, we just can't give that clarity. I think once the end of March has gone by and Article 50 has been triggered, I think once those negotiations start, we will be able to bring forward policies at a much stronger rate than we are at the moment, because there is just no clarity at the moment coming from anywhere.
George.
I think I can give you the reassurance that what we put in place will be better for new entrants than the current system. The truth is that the current CAP effectively protects incumbents at the expense of new entrants. And what I found very interesting since the decision to leave the EU is a number of younger farmers, young go-ahead entrepreneurs, who are telling me that actually they believe it'll be easier for them to expand their businesses and to get on in life if we were to reform the system along the lines I'm talking about. So supporting investment in farm businesses, supporting knowledge transfer, rather than sort of arbitrary payments based on how much land you own. And I think this is what's really interesting. There's a great opportunity here for new entrants, and it will be one of the areas that we look at. How you help those people who probably should be retiring to retire with dignity, while creating opportunities for new entrants. And I see many, many bright, young, talented people to come through and basically fulfill their ambitions.
Quick show of hands, who feels reassured? Who still feels in need of reassurance? Okay, some work to do. Let's take a couple of questions from the app. A quick one, George. You say Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 will disappear. Does that mean some farmers will not qualify? Yes or no?
Qualify for what, I guess, is the answer. What I'm saying,
payment.
The point I was making is
that you need to know, is it?
It's not really yes or no. You need to move away from the sort of arbitrary historic thinking of Pillar 1, Pillar 2. What we should be thinking about is how do we best fund and support an agriculture policy.
So I guess the question is, will that cover all farmers regardless, or will they have to do something to get the money?
Well, the types of approach that I'm looking at and exploring, particularly when it comes to agriculture environment, I would envisage as being universal schemes that every farmer would be able to sign up to, and looking at how we can improve soil husbandry and crop husbandry on a landscape scale, but which every farmer would be able to subscribe to.
Callum, why should Scottish farmers continue to be paid more than the rest of the UK? It's not me, it's on the app.
Where's Andrea Leadsom gone? Well, actually, Scottish farmers are being shortchanged by the current government, as you saw with the convergence uplift money, 223 million euros, which should have either all, at least the vast majority, should have flowed to Scottish farming. And I know that George has been rather busy arguing for Brexit and now dealing with the aftermath of that decision. But we actually are entitled to more than we are receiving. I think the point in terms of funding, though, I mean, I welcome what George is saying, and largely I would agree with that. I think there are opportunities to vary the scheme. What I think would provide more reassurance is if we were to make a commitment on the level of funding, is to say, well, do you know what, we will continue with the same level of funding, we will ring fence that. There were buses going around saying we're getting even more money back, so it's not that we can't afford it. So let's make a commitment on the level of payment, both at a UK level and then at an independent nation level. So
you want to keep the whole $3 billion?
I would commit to the same level of funding until you can argue coherently that actually farming is more profitable, the marketplace has changed, and support payments at that level are not required.
Who would back that commitment on this panel?
My view is we've already made that commitment until 2020, so we've given farmers absolute clarity and certainty out until 2020. Of course, we'll have a funded agriculture policy after that. But I think the right thing to do is to design the policy, work out a policy that makes sense, that's right for this country, and then you know how much money you need to fund it.
Realistically, you're not going to have that money that Callum is willing to commit to, perhaps because he doesn't have to find it. You're not going to persuade the rest of the cabinet of that, surely.
We don't know. I think the right thing is to design the policy that's right for this country, and then you know how much funding you need to deliver it, and that's what we'll be doing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, that was the point I was making. You know, our predecessors have not had to sit around a cabinet table and fight for that funding.
Yeah, and I think what we need to do is actually sort of change our mindset and our view of what agriculture means to the United Kingdom. And we haven't had to do that because we have had an over-reliance on the subsidies coming back from the EU. And certainly if you speak to any Northern Ireland farmer, they will say they could do with more money. But because Northern Ireland is very intensively farmed and we have a reliance on the rural community, I mean, absolutely, we'll be fighting for as much as we can get.
Okay, let's go to number 5.
Thank you. Edward Morehouse. Given the Secretary of State's call for greater exports and optimising the global market, developing a UK brand and a USP, is delivering this strategy best placed with Dr. Liam Fox's International Trade Department vice your 4 offices?
The approach we're taking on trade is broadly the model that's followed in the US, where you have the USDA, US Department for Agriculture, that leads on the agricultural elements of trade deals. DEFRA will lead on the agricultural elements of any future trade deals. But crucially, this will be a joined-up government approach. So yes, Liam Fox and the Department for International Trade will have overarching responsibility for any trade deal. But DEFRA officials will be part of that delegation. DEFRA ministers will be actively engaged in the agricultural elements of it.
Trade agreements is an area that concerns both myself and I think all the sectors greatly. They take years to get right. And I'm not sure that there are the negotiating skills that are going to be needed within the UK government. For instance, we are working with America at the moment in relation to our lamb. And I think we're 7 years into the process now. These are long timelines, and it is very concerning. I think it was Michelle who said, you know, at the moment, it's the EU market where we export the most. Take that away, there's great concerns.
Michelle?
Yeah, and obviously there are challenges for us as from the Northern Ireland perspective with our near neighbour and what trading is going to look like with the Republic of Ireland, which in itself is very much reliant on the UK market. So I mean, the markets will that's mutually beneficial for us to be looking at something which is very close to home. But we need to be very mindful of sensitive products and the vulnerability that they will have in the market as well.
Yeah, it's a huge concern, the lack of trade negotiating skills. If any young people are looking for a career, trade negotiation would be a good choice, I think, at the moment. Not that I'm suggesting or inspiring young farmers head in that direction, but because we need them too. But we can't forget the importance of the EU market. 90% of exports in beef and lamb go to the EU. 70% of pork goes to the EU. So that's why a relationship is so critically important. And we can talk about other markets, but let's look at what will happen if we get a bad deal. Right, WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, would look at a minimum tariff into the EU of 20%, if that's what we default back onto. On red meat, which I've just said is critically important, the EU is critically important, modelling suggests anywhere between an average of 50%, and recent modelling by the NFUS even suggested 76% increase in cost into the EU market. That's why we believe we should remain part of the single market. That's why we need to strike the right deal, because otherwise our existing markets are going to disappear, never mind any new ones.
I want to take a couple more questions. Performance-related pay, though, ladies and gentlemen. If you keep them short, you get to coffee. Okay, number 1.
John Chin, a farmer from Herefordshire. I wondered, Madam Chairman, if as the chair of one of the new Agri-Tech Innovation Centres, I could plead with the Ministers of Agriculture to work actively and positively to encourage the research institutes in their areas to all work together for the benefit of food, farming and the environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good Lord,
I think
you've rendered them almost voiceless, and they've all agreed. I suspect he'd also like some money.
Yeah, but I think it has to go further than that as well. So it's not just with working across the regions, but also within our own region. I think the focus very much has to be on agri-tech, but also working along with our schools and encouraging young people to get involved in agri-food technology and supporting our local farmers as well. And certainly we're doing that along with a number of our departments working with schools and the universities and colleges, and we also have obviously our own dedicated CAFRE and AFBI as well.
Let's go to number 3, please.
John Hoy from Bidwells. Clearly there's huge doubt and worry about the post-2020 rural landscape. There's been an inquiry recently in England on rural tourism, which I think is worth about 17 billion to the English economy. George, when do we hear the findings of that inquiry, and when can we expect some more support for rural tourism, which I'm sure across the UK is worth multiply much more than 17 billion?
Yeah, this is an interesting area, and we're looking at the broader rural context, including tourism, as part of our future planning. I mean, I come from Cornwall, where we've traditionally had some EU support for certain industries, certain projects. But what's quite interesting is after the decision to leave the EU, there's actually quite a bit of focus now on the potential for post-EU schemes to support things like tourism. So the current ERDF scheme that comes from the EU, it's for green technology and it's for digital technology, and sort of so-called unfashionable industries like tourism get overlooked and are not allowed to be supported. Equally, coastal communities are not allowed to be supported by these EU grants. So we've got an opportunity actually to have much more flexible approaches to the way we support regional policy in future. And it might well be the case that we're able to give support to tourism, which to date under the EU has been a Cinderella industry.
Leslie, would that be similar in way?
Yes, I absolutely agree. I mentioned that, agriculture is so much more than food production. It's about guardianship of that land. And we know that people come to Wales, to have a look at our fantastic countryside. So there is a role for tourism, and maybe that is one of the opportunities, looking at glass half full, that is an opportunity going forward to have that support for tourism.
Michelle?
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Callum?
Yeah, I agree. I think the important thing is, a bit like a consultation's an easy way of ducking questions, and sometimes, don't get me wrong, a legitimate answer. The EU's been used as a bit of a scapegoat in the past. Oh, well, we can't quite do that. There's an EU rule that stops us doing it. That doesn't mean that when these EU rules potentially disappear, that we automatically go and do it. So there are opportunities out there, but this comes back to the resourcing point in groups like DEFRA. I struggle to get answers out of the department. I have a lot of time for George and his officials. I think they're good people, but I struggle to get answers out of them in any kind of acceptable time limit. And in that environment, how can we expect them to seize the opportunities? George was the only hand that went up in terms of is there enough resource, and well done for doing that, by the way. Your job is safe because you actually understand agriculture. I agree with that. But, so there are opportunities, but we need more resource. We need to be consciously competent in following and pursuing the opportunities that are out there. Otherwise, we won't.
A couple of quick questions before we go. I'm going to ask this one from the app because it's come up a lot of times. George, can you update us on what's happening to the farmers who were underpaid in 2015, who are still waiting correct payments? As briefly as you can.
Look, the RPA, we're very focused during December, making sure that we got over 90% of farmers paid, and we got to 91% of farmers for this year paid. There are a few, a small number actually, of outstanding cases from last year where there continues to be some dispute over whether they were paid the correct amount or not. That's going to be a priority for the RPA now in the new year.
The misery was shared across the UK in many cases.
In Wales, we did very well. I'm pleased to say 90% of our farmers got it on December the 1st. They didn't have to wait till the end of December like they did in England. Unfortunately, we have quite a lot of cross-border farms, and there is a difficulty with RP England, which we're trying to solve very quickly.
Callum?
One of the advantages of being an MP is I haven't been directly involved in the joy that is the cap payment system. But I mean, Fergus Ewing, the new minister, came in. It was his absolute #1 priority to ensure not only that we caught up, but that we also, in some key areas, put in place loan systems so that we got ahead rather than face challenges again further down the road.
Michelle?
Oh, can I say then we got 96% of our eligible farmers paid. And also, as the only region, and in the United Kingdom, actually, we had advance payments in October, so we're very pleased with ourselves.
One final cheeky question to end on from Twitter. Will any of the panellists campaign to stay in the EU and render this entire conversation defunct?
Absolutely not. We made the right decision, and we should see it through.
No.
No, I don't think it was the right decision.
A slightly qualified answer. So we will argue to stay in the single market very clearly. And of course, the only realistic route that could happen is if the UK government doesn't listen. It doesn't deliver on this idea that we are equals. And then you might see a different question put to the Scottish people. But the ball's very much in the UK government's court.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's where we have to leave it. Could you join me in thanking our panel? Thank you very much for all the questions.